The agenda this week examined the Ontario government's proposed labour overhaul, considered new approaches for helping kids succeed in school and beyond, and reflected on 50 years since the Arab-Israeli conflict known as the Six-Day War. The agenda's Week in Review begins with our Ontario election preview, 1 year to the day before the province goes to the polls on June 7th, 2018. I know you guys think you have a good news story to tell, and yet the polls suggest, and I know polls are worth, what you pay for them, but, they suggest that either the word is not getting out or people are not on side with your agenda. What do you think's going on?
I don't pay a lot of attention to polls between elections, and if you actually did a study and looked at what the polling numbers say a year before an election, what they say at the beginning of the election, what the results are, if there's any correlation, it's a negative correlation. So I think for us, we know what we want to do. We're Liberals. We've worked really hard to get to balance. We've had the first balanced budget this year in
almost a decade.
In almost a decade. And the economy is growing faster in Ontario than anywhere else in the country, leading the G7 countries. So we're doing a really good job on economic growth. We've got our books in order, and that gives us the freedom to do the things we've been wanting to do for a long time.
So let's grant you all of that, but then ask the follow-up question. Then why are the Premier's popularity numbers personally so in the tank?
So I get to work with Kathleen Wynne every day. I am a huge admirer of her. And my caucus, my cabinet colleagues, we all think the world of her. I've given up trying to understand how some politicians are popular and some aren't. She is a remarkable woman with a remarkable work ethic. She really leads with her values. She's got all the ingredients, and I look forward to the campaign and the lead up to the campaign where she's going to get out and talk to more people, and they're going to be able to say, you know what? That is the woman I want to lead my province. You
may have stopped asking the question, but I have not, because I'm truly intrigued by the fact that Liberals everywhere tell me they really like her. They think she connects with people. They think she's a hard worker. All of the above. So I'm really curious about this. Do you think, you're a demographer before you got into politics, so you understand a lot about people and how they think, and do you think her gender has anything to do with the fact that she's not more popular?
I've asked myself that question many times, and I don't know what the answer is. I just don't know what the answer is. But the reality is she's a woman, and she's fantastic, and she's going to work hard. We're all going to work hard, and see what the people say a year from today.
Okay, so you're dodging that one. Let me try another one. Do you think her sexual orientation has anything to do with her low popularity?
I don't think so. I think the people who had a problem with that had a problem with it, still have a problem with it, but I don't think so. I think it's just part of who she is. Well,
let me try another option here, because I do hear this criticism when I ask, and I ask people this question every day.
Yeah.
What do you think of the Premier?
Do you have an answer?
Well, I'm exploring. Yeah, I really am looking into it. And the criticism I do hear fed back to me most frequently is she's not who we thought she was. She got elected 3 years ago on I'm different. I'm nicer. I'm not going to be like what came before me. And then some things have taken place over the intervening 3 years to make people conclude, oh, God, she's just like every other bloody politician who's broken our hearts. Do you hear that?
So what I hear is that the people, go back to what she did on pension reform. We want people to have a comfortable retirement. We went from having an Ontario retirement pension plan to the nation now is going to have enhanced pension, free tuition, childcare spaces, doubling the number of spots available. All of the initiatives, we've announced the increase of the minimum wage. Paid sick days.
This is all true, but you've also
these are the expressions of her values.
I hear
it's
you.
Who she is.
I hear you.
She's bold, she's brave, and she's driving change.
But there's also police investigations, and there's also, a coming court case in September, and there's also, still fallout from gas plants, and there's also, a lot of monkey business around the Sudbury by-election that took place that got Glenn Thibeault into your government. And all of that gets fed back to me in, oh, she's just like everybody else.
Well, she is an extraordinary person, and she's unlike anybody I've ever worked with.
David Peterson, Bob Rae, Mike Harris, Dalton McGuinty, they all started on the opposition benches before they got into the Premier's office. So I want to first find out, How well does the job you currently have prepare you for the job that you ultimately want?
I think you certainly grow in the job, and frankly, you learn in the job. You travel the province, every corner of the province, you study the government's books, you get a sense of where there are shortcomings, and frankly, you get a greater appreciation for where there's no longer value for money. And so it's very instructive being leader of the opposition, and you get significant insights.
You know, if you do win the election a year from today, you won't be the youngest premier ever, and we'll put the graphic up here to show this, but you would be the youngest premier in 84 years. Mitchell Hepburn became Premier of Ontario in 1934. He was 37 years old. Edward Blake, back in the 19th century, was 38. Then you've got Bill Davis, David Peterson, and Ernest Drury, who were all 41, and then Bob Rae was 42 years old. I think one of Ernest Drury's, is it his grandson who works for you, or used to?
He's a good friend.
Good friend? Yeah. Anyway, for those who question whether a guy who has not yet seen his 40th birthday has the experience or the maturity to do this job, what do you say?
I never believed age is a barrier in public service. It's about getting Ontario back on track. It's about creating jobs in Ontario, making Ontario a place where you want to raise a family and create a business. And so I think that is the question: is how can we get more competent government in Ontario? I don't think it's an issue of age or any other characteristic.
Okay, but people look at you and they point out that, you know, you weren't a cabinet minister when you served as an MP, you weren't a parliamentary assistant, you weren't a chair of a committee, you've had no cabinet experience, obviously, at the provincial level. You know, compare that to the experience on the other side, or with the third party, Andrea Horwath, and they may ask, I don't know if this guy's seen enough or done enough to warrant getting the second biggest job in Canadian politics. How do you respond?
Well, I think the same old in Ontario is broken. Frankly, Kathleen Wynne and this Liberal government's had a lot of experience for 14 years, and that experience has taken us the wrong direction. Do we need more of their experience on hydro? No. Do we need more of their experience on receiving equalization payments and being a have-not province? Absolutely not. I think we need a new approach. I think we need a new way, and Ontario can do better and should do better.
Let me see if I can suss you out a bit on that, and I'm going to put this challenge to you. Without using the words Kathleen Wynne or Liberals, I want you to tell us why you think a government led by Patrick Brown a year from today would be better than what we've got now.
It will be honest. It will be transparent. You'll get value for money. We're going to focus on creating the conditions to create an environment in which jobs can flourish, where businesses can flourish. We need to unleash our job creators. That's not the case today. So it will be a very different approach. It will be making sure Ontario can be the economic engine within Canada.
I do remember when Mike Harris came in 1995, and within literally days of having the job, he canceled 4 things that the previous Bob Rae government had done. Have you got an informal checklist in your head already that if you win a year from now, this, they're all out?
Well, it's a pretty long list of areas that we say we're not getting value for money.
Let
me give you one example right at the top, hydro. Some of the atrocious contracts the government's signing, continues to sign. There are some of these contracts that they're hiding. They won't give us the details, but we know where the notice to proceed hasn't gone out. We can absolutely get out of it with no legal cost. And so immediately I'm going to look at these bad contracts. The fact that we've given away $6 billion in surplus electricity, the fact that we continue to give it away to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York, I want to look at those contracts right away. I want to make sure that as quickly as possible we deal with this hydro fiasco.
Ms. Horwath, I watch Question Period every day. That's how boring my life is. And you know what I've noticed over the last many months that I've been watching?
What's that?
We've got a little clip pack here, okay? Let's roll this, please.
Will this Premier and the Liberal Party admit that mandating politically motivated, politically convenient inserts to be included in people's hydro bills during an election campaign is just too far to go, even for the Liberals?
Hear, hear. As I recall, it was the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, it was seniors across the province, it was New Democrats that forced them to back down from increasing prescription costs for seniors. That's what was in their initial budget, Speaker. I think the minister forgets.
Okay, one of the things that you seem to be lately is a lot angrier. Is that an incorrect inference on my part?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's anger so much as it's frustration. I hear from people of Ontario all the time. Folks are hitting a tipping point. They're frustrated. They don't believe that the government is hearing them and understanding what they're going through. I mean, folks are at a situation where the cost of everything, hydro included, hydro especially, is going up.
Well, hydro's coming down 25%.
Well, we'll see. Only to go up again in a couple of years' time is what the Financial Accountability Officer was pretty clear about. So that relief is going to be very, very short term, and the system won't be changing. The electricity system's not changing. So the mess that the Liberals have made of hydro is just going to continue to exist, and we're just going to be paying more for it because they're going to stretch the cost of paying for it for over a longer period of time. But look, that's what's frustrating. And even when I go across the province, I mean, here in Toronto, when I hear from people, the sense is one of extreme disappointment in this Premier, in Kathleen Wynne.
Based on what?
Well, based on what they tell me. Why? They tell me that she was one person or Premier before the election and turned into something totally different after the election. And they're very, very disappointed. Around the province, though, in ridings outside of the general Toronto area, they're angry. They're angry, they're mad as hell, and they're quite tired of Kathleen Wynne and the Liberal government.
Well, let me ask if there's some anger on your part, because now you guys came out with what looked like a very thoughtful plan on a Pharmacare option that you advanced, and then they kind of scooped you in their own budget, and they put out a different plan, which you could argue which one's better than the other. I've heard experts on both sides. Are you kind of ticked off that they stole some of your thunder on that?
Well, you know what? We are going to continue to put our ideas out there because it's what's good for Ontarians. I mean, the people of Ontario deserve a Pharmacare plan, frankly, that you don't have to worry about how old you are or how much money you make to be able to qualify for it.
Because yours covers everybody.
Ours covers everybody, whereas the government...
Fewer drugs, but more people.
Well, initially. I mean, the other thing that you can't forget is, the Liberal plan, when you're 24 years old, you qualify. The minute you're 25 years old, you no longer get your prescription drugs. Think about all those people leaving post-secondary education right around that age. They are not going to be eligible for the drug coverage. Some of them had that in university or college. They won't be able to get it afterwards. People in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s, people who, for example, who are needing HIV drugs, they're not going to be eligible unless they're under 24 or under.
So their plan that may cover thousands more different medications, but only till age 25, you feel is inferior to yours.
Extremely so, but also, I mean, let's remember, thousands of more medications, the vast majority of which would never be prescribed for youth and for children. And so, again, the Liberals like to put a lot of numbers out there that make their plan look really great. But one of the important things that it doesn't do, other than the fact that it doesn't cover everyone, which ours does, is that it doesn't provide us with that buying power that will help us to wrestle down the cost of drugs with the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, this is one of the big problems that we have in Ontario and across Canada.
I mean, businesses in this province are operating in the same environment of vulnerable environment that workers are, right? You have an economy like Ontario, which has extremely high costs to operate, and now that's combined with the uncertainty of a renegotiation of NAFTA. Businesses here are extremely challenged, and so they're trying to get by. They're trying to provide these good jobs. They're trying to contribute back to their communities. I think it's underestimated the extent to which they are now extremely challenged every day by trying to get ahead.
I hope you're not justifying breaking the law, Carl, because that's kind of
no,
insane.
No, I'm not justifying breaking the law.
Because I think
what I'm trying to justify is going from...
Hang on, I need one of you at a time.
What I'm trying to justify is going from this many regulations to this many regulations and saying, go business, go create jobs. It's extremely challenging, and it's not how you set up a successful economy in this province.
Can I do one fast follow-up here? Just in terms of where it looks to you, like where the government of Ontario is coming from, does it feel to you as if businesses are viewed by the government of Ontario as somehow problems to be solved?
You know, the 2017 budget took a look at job creation in Ontario's economy since the recession. 98% of jobs created have been full-time. 78% of those have been in above-average wage industries. So I can't understand the notion of how businesses in this province could be seen as somehow trying to be not sharing the wealth. They are absolutely doing that.
Does the government of Ontario demonize businesses in this province, in your view?
Well, I would not use that word.
What word would you use?
Well, these are challenges that businesses are going to have to confront. and it undermines every day the ability of businesses to be successful.
I mean, that's actually not true. What the research shows is that if you have a high wage, high standard path to growth, that businesses do better. So, I mean, Armin Yalnizyan has written about this, others have written about this. Minimum wages actually help lower turnover, increase productivity. It adds an immediate stimulus to the economy because those
minimum
workers,
wage. We're coming to that.
those workers spend that money in the local community. But those, if you make those jobs good jobs, and the employers may not have considered that an option beforehand, but if you put those standards in place, then the employers tend to recognize the benefits of that high wage, low turnover path to growth.
Sorry, can I offer a contrarian view, perhaps, that sort of maybe puts
as long
both
as it's
ideas,
not about the minimum wage, because we're getting
both
to that.
ideas in perspective. Okay. No, there's a fundamental juxtaposition that has to be addressed. And in the labor market, there's always going to be a need for an equity or a fairness function to be provided. Now, actors can compete in that space to provide it. Employers, if they're decent, pay workers fair wages, give them voice at the workplace, lessens the need from government or trade unions to intervene. What we've seen in Ontario and across Canada is a growing gap, in the private sector especially, where we used to have 1 out of 3 jobs that were covered by some collective agreement, where terms and conditions were negotiated by employers and workers, which then spilled over into other firms. You know this example well. Hamilton had 2 big steel firms, Stelco and Dofasco. Dofasco was non-union, but its terms and conditions were essentially set by the negotiations that happened at Stelco.
Yeah, Stelco would negotiate, Dofasco would say,
to remain
okay,
non-union,
we'll take that too.
You had to pay better and have better conditions. As that is lessened, there's fewer than 15% of workers in the private sector today that have negotiated settlements. That's a huge gap. The fairness function, if it's not provided by employers, will then grow out of places like the Workers' Action Center and produce the response from government. At the same time, I think employment standards are a very weak mechanism. It's sort of the default collective agreement for the non-union sector. It's complicated, it's one size fits all, hard to enforce. They're going to up the numbers by 150 inspectors. We have 300,000 establishments in the province of Ontario. You think 100 inspectors are going to be able to do it?
Not going to do much.
Voice at the workplace is the best insurance against precarity.
But let me,
and it gives
Craig,
employers a chance to negotiate the best deal at the workplace, where it should happen.
This study, admittedly, is a few years old. Toronto District School Board releasing the results of a large-scale survey. 90% of the students in grades 7 to 11 took part, so that's a lot. And here's what they found. More than half of the students in grades 7 and 8 reported that they felt tired for no reason or had difficulty concentrating. More than 3/4 of the students in grades 9 to 12 reported having these problems. 40% of all students in grades 7 and 8 and 66% of all students in grades 9 to 12 reported feeling under stress. And 63% of all students in grades 7 and 8 and 72% of all high school students said they felt nervous or anxious often or all the time. Let's get into this. What do these numbers tell you?
Well, first of all, I should tell you that Fraser Mustard and I had looked at a number of studies to find out if this was an anomaly.
He's the late great childhood education, early childhood education master.
Yeah, we published all that in Early Years Study 2 that was published in 2007, and it appears that the trends that were picked up in the TDSB study are in fact not just a phenomenon occurring in Toronto, but across the country, and rural as well as urban. Yeah. So what we wanted to know, and we've been studying this for a while now, is there some sort of underlying factor? And it appears to be heightened stress reactivity, too much stress in their lives. Of course, kids do need stress. They need a certain amount of stress to learn, to exercise. But with too much stress, you start to get that list of mental health and behavioral problems that you mentioned.
Any reason to believe the numbers today are higher than they might have been 25 or 50 years ago?
That's a question that we look at pretty carefully, and I go through that step by step in the book. There's no simple explanation, but the reality is that when we look at stress, stress is not well understood, at least not in the original scientific sense. So we break stress down into 5 domains. We look at biological stress. So for example, we have stresses right now, you and I, with these lights. We look at emotional stress, which is the common one. We also look at cognitive stress, and that's not well understood. And we look at social stress, and then finally something called prosocial stress. The reason I mention it is we see really quite significant increases in all 5 of those domains. And they start to interact with each other. They have a multiplying effect on each other, so that when you get something like that TDSB report, what it's telling us is these kids are caught in something called a stress cycle. And it's very hard for them to break out of it.
Let's just do a quick follow-up on there. You say the lights and the sort of the fake TV environment, obviously, that we find ourselves in right now, it can be stressful.
Yeah.
But you're not stressed out, and I'm not stressed out because, well,
it's a great point.
Either we're accustomed to it, or
it's a great point.
We kind of get off on a little bit of stress, which makes our jobs a little bit more fun.
So that's like it's sort of like the major point when we start to look at stress, because first of all, every child is different. So what's a stressor for one child is not a stressor for another. And in fact, the lights are not a stress for me, and I assume not for you.
Right.
And so we find like there are children that just absolutely crave the kind of lighting that they'll get, say, in a classroom, but other children that are overstressed from it. So what's a stress for a child, for your particular child, is something you've got to figure out. You have to become like a stress detective.
I understood biological, emotion, cognitive, social, I get all those.
Yeah.
Prosocial, I'd not heard before looking at your book. So what's that?
So that's really interesting, because someone else's distress is in fact a stress for a child. They internalize it, they get overloaded by it. And the result can be that they'll shut down their empathy, or they'll shut down their capacity to do something called mind reading, to actually understand what another person's thinking. So that's a prosocial stress.
Let's look at a list of symptoms that you do mention in your book, and this is pretty exhaustive. Here's stress manifesting itself in young people. They have issues with anger control, antisocial behavior, mindlessly risky behavior. Needless to say, drug, alcohol, and gambling addictions, intentional self-harm, eating disorders, sleep disorders, body image disorders. Are you telling us stress is the underlying cause of all of these things?
No, but what we would say, the causes are, in each of those cases, they're going to be fairly complex. But what we do find is that stress is exacerbated in these conditions. And so what we do is by working on something called self-regulation, which is how well the child or the teen can recognize when they're becoming overstressed and manage it, we can dramatically mitigate their vulnerability, their susceptibility to that list.
You write about Garrison.
Garrison, yeah.
Who is he?
Garrison's a former student. I worked with him for 3 or 4 years. Struggling student, really charismatic and caring, but was experiencing some hardships that you don't want any of your students to face: poverty, drug addiction in the family, low income kind of situation. And Garrison was having trouble sticking with school. It wasn't for him. And he was really good at hoop jumping and kind of going through the role of being a learner. But Garrison would disappear from school for days and weeks on end. And we were doing everything to kind of keep Garrison connected to his learning. I kind of felt like I was Garrison's champion for 3 years. And eventually Garrison just kind of slipped through my fingers and disappeared for a couple months. And driving for coffee one day at lunch, I saw Garrison skating in a local skate park, and I asked him to come for coffee with me. And I think that conversation with Garrison was the biggest shift, or resulted in the biggest shift I made in my teaching practice.
So what happened?
I asked him one simple question, and that was, Garrison, what do you truly love to do? What makes you tick? What do you do in your free time? And I was surprised to hear it was graffiti art, because I had never heard of this coming from him before in the 3-4 years that I worked with him previously. And I said, I don't believe it. And he said, come on, I'll show you. And so we jumped back in my car and we drove a few blocks. And I kid you not, we climbed over some railroad tracks to an abandoned warehouse, and there was Garrison's artwork. And it blew me away for many reasons. It blew me away because he was so willing to publicly share something that was so vulnerable for him to share. It blew me away because it was beautiful. And it blew me away because there were so many pieces of our learning evident in his work. I saw theme, I saw symbolism, I saw poetry. And those were elements I wasn't seeing Garrison touch down on in the classroom. And so we turned it into, essentially assignments for class. I said, Garrison, could you write about your inspirations behind graffiti art? And the next day he came into class with an eloquently written paper. And that was the most engaging piece of writing I'd ever seen Garrison produce. And so we explored this throughout the rest of the year, this highly personalized approach to Garrison's learning. And it filtered into everything Garrison was doing, not just the work in our class, but other teachers were hearing of Garrison and they were asking questions about Garrison's work. His art teacher gave Garrison a huge chunk of our school wall to create a graffiti art mural that still stands to this day.
Wow.
And this just boosted Garrison's confidence, right? And Garrison's a bit of a metaphor for my belief in personalized learning, which is that all students deserve what Garrison got. It shouldn't just be one student who is struggling with school or school, quote unquote, isn't for them. I think if I'm working with 25 learners, they all deserve to have that highly experienced or personalized approach.
And we're going to talk more about public sharing as part of inquiry-based learning. Now you encourage your students to do a Garrison. Do you have any students that might not be able to flourish in that setting?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about this approach, inquiry-based learning, is it really is, it provides me the ability to work one-on-one with students and really meet their needs. And so if a student is anxious about publicly displaying their learning to an authentic audience or showcasing their understanding in a really huge, visible way, I could work one-on-one with them to take strides in the right direction.
Authenticity is something that comes up several times in the book. What do you mean when you say authentic?
Yeah, authentic in my mind means, I have to start with relevance to the learner. And I think if it's relevant to the learner, it's authentic learning. And I think the opposite of authentic learning is prescribed learning or standardized learning. I think that really strips the voice from the student out of the learning.
We know that 50 years ago plus, the Israelis were considered the Davids and the Arab world surrounding...
Before the 67
Before the war, exactly,
yes.
Before the war. And the Arab world surrounding Israel was the Goliaths. I'm not so sure anybody sees it that way anymore. How have Israelis got their heads around the notion that they may now be the Goliaths of the region as opposed to the Davids?
Well, I think you're putting your finger on probably the most intractable part of this whole problem. Is certainly the Palestinians see themselves as David. They have none of the assets that Israel have. They have no formal army. They really don't have the capacity to engage on the battlefield in any meaningful way, and they're David. And so therefore the slingshot that David had is really material to the way Palestinians organize their resistance. But here's the irony. And here I'm departing from the way we would calculate this in any objective way and just talking about how both sides see this. The Israelis still see themselves as David. They still see, they bring that history of thousands of years of persecution. They constantly fear eradication. They revert to Holocaust language and Holocaust imagery. And I think when we understand that we have two Davids here, not objectively, it's clear who the Goliath is. It's Israel on the ground. But that's not the self-perception. And it's that self-perception, each one is a David, that makes this conflict so hard to resolve, despite some very real efforts by outsiders.
Gabriel, can I get you to weigh in on this issue of how Israelis have either changed or not changed their view over the intervening 50 years as to who is David and who is Goliath in this part of the world now?
Yeah, Israel is for sure David. David punches above his weight by definition. David is small but clever, small but strong, and brilliant. Israel punches above its weight in seeking peace. In 2000, 2001, 2008, it tried to shed the burden of occupation. It was refused, and David got a hideous, bloody intifada in its place that killed 1,000 people, murdered 1,000 people. Israel is a David that punches above its weight in terms of high-tech, cybersecurity, counterterrorism, desalination. Around the world, David is a brilliant technological powerhouse through the use of its ingenuity. David punches above its weight in terms of stability in a region that's in chaos. Israel is an island of stability in a region out of control. The David that is Israel punches above its weight in terms of democratic freedoms, women's rights, gay rights, and in terms of quality of life. Israel ranks 11th in the happiness surveys. And in the recent Israel Democracy Index studies, Arab Israeli citizens rank as high and sometimes higher than Jewish Israeli citizens in their satisfaction with the quality of life in Israel.
Okay, let me jump in here, if I can. Let me jump in and offer our two other friends who are out of town an opportunity to respond to what they've just heard. Samer, you first, on the issue of who's David and who's Goliath.
Yeah, Steve, I would encourage your viewers and everyone here today to take a look at Plus 972 magazine, the magazine for which I contribute, because it is, first and foremost, it's an Israeli outlet. And you'll find on there articles written by Israeli journalists describing, really putting the lie to what was just said about women's rights, immigrant rights, gay rights, and this sort of this facade of Israel being a beacon of liberal democracy in the Middle East. That, you know, there is a case to be made for that, certainly. But I think in Israelis' own words, you can read about some of the recent actions that were taken, for example, against Ethiopian immigrants who were rounded up and penned indefinitely in you know, essentially open air prisons similar to those you would see in Gaza. And you know, this added to the fact that the idea, the notion that Israel has been propagating peace and offering, you know, a sop to the Palestinians for the last 50 years, if only they were wise enough to take it, is sort of betrayed by the fact that the number of settlements, for example, and the number of settlers in the West Bank alone has more than doubled since the beginning of the peace process.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, June the 9th, 2017. Incidentally, the 40th anniversary of St. Catharines MPP Jim Bradley's first election to the Ontario Legislature. We had Mr. Bradley on the program last night to discuss that milestone. If you missed it, check it out. It's on our website at tvo.org/theagenda. And you can see all of those conversations you just saw in their entirety at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda. And now thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page. That's periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.